Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session this afternoon on working with Indigenous peoples to approach climate-resilient water management with community and traditional knowledge. I live and work on Narrandjeri land in South Australia, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. In Australia, the welcome to country and acknowledgement of country is a very important way of giving Aboriginal people back their place in society. It's paying respect in a formal sense and following traditional custom in a very symbolic way. My name is Carleen Maywald, and I have been involved in the world of water politics, policy and reform for what seems like forever. I am formerly the Minister for Water Security with the South Australian Government and formerly the Chair of the Australian National Water Commission. And I'm currently the South Australian Water Ambassador. I'm also a partner of the Australian Water Partnership, and I acknowledge the enormous support offered by them to enable us to be here today. Thank you, Australian Water Partnership. Today's session will focus on the deep insights that Indigenous people have into water management, traditional knowledge that's passed from generation to generation, continuing to this day, recognising the importance of water and its centrality to life. Historically, Australia has not had a strong track record on recognising the importance of Indigenous people's traditional knowledge in the climate space or any space, but this is changing. 60,000 years of walking softly and sustainably within a changing landscape cannot and should not be ignored. This session will explore water and climate stories from Australia and the Indo-Pacific. We will highlight community and traditional knowledge approaches for inclusive action on water and climate. It continues a conversation that's building on momentum from across global forums, from Stockholm to Cairo to the 2023 UN Water Conference, about the potential of applying such valuable knowledge in a changing climate. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague and fellow collaborator, Mr. Phil Duncan. Phil is a proud Gamilaroi man from Moree in outback Australia. He has extensive experience working with community and government to enable Indigenous voices in decision-making, particularly in natural resource management. Phil and I have worked together for nearly 30 years, and I've learned as much from him as almost everything I know. And with Phil, our relationship is deep, and I now call him my Dagan, my brother. Over to you, Phil.
Marabou Carleen. I would like to share the load and not just talk about it, but actually demonstrate it. And I'd like to ask my sister, Dr. Virginia Marshall, to actually do an acknowledgement of country, because it's not just a male thing. Women's centrality to our communities, our families, and our cultural way of life and their knowledge, and as decision makers. So my sister, my Bawa, I'd like for you to do the acknowledgement of country today.
Thank you, Phil. Maringyaraya, everyone. Yunari Virginia Marshall. It's wonderful to have you here. Well, I think after Gender Day, what we both discussed is that, women are so important, not only for the future of the planet, we know that, but also for the transmission of knowledge, for the instilling of ethics and our customary laws and practices with our young people. So that's really an essential thing for our community. And we know that women carry the load generally. Across the world, we can see that in remote and rural Australia. They're usually making sure that, the good health and well-being of our community is really working, right? And working for everyone. They're the first people to go out there and wanting to be part of the Indigenous land and sea ranges, for example. The sad part is that in Australia we don't have parity yet. We have 2/3 men in the Indigenous land and sea ranges who do a lot of work in caring for country, on country, biodiversity and many other areas. So we need to include women on a 50-50 parity at least. That's one thing that we agree on, as well as many other things. But I think that, we can see in the landscape in Australia that we've really been here forever. That's what we say, always was and always will be. But the carbon dating also puts us at about 80,000 years that we've actually been on this planet, which is pretty extraordinary. And probably with our presence here, it's really been so different to come here to so many voices and events. And Glasgow was very different last year because, you know, it had a different buzz. But I'm certainly feeling that the Egyptian people have been very warm and also very hospitable. We've had a really good and hospitable time here. And we're learning just the basics, which is wonderful as well. And that's what we do. We exchange language, even with the white settlers. When the French were there in Wadden, in Dharawal language, we know that La Perouse was teaching our people French, and we were teaching him Dharawal. So that was really amazing. And we've done that also with the Dutch. We had that language exchange, and those were in the 1600s. So it's pretty amazing. Our history is pretty amazing. And we're still here in spite of colonisation, in spite of assimilation. And the legacy of our communities is with us and will always be with us. And the legacy of our old people that really fought for us and our generations in the future. So we really give that legacy to them and the celebration that we're still here for 233 years later. Thank you. Madanguwu.
So I want to start out with saying, Marabou, that was wonderful. And to the four ladies that I get the wonderful opportunity to share the stage with, thank you for allowing me to share the limelight with you. I'm going to talk about collaboration. I'm going to talk about cultural science. I'm going to talk about building the confidence and capacity of our champions in Australia, and I believe it's globally, but particularly from an Australian perspective, we know that we have a lot of champions that want to not just talk with us, but walk with us and learn more and more and more about our cultural way of life, our spiritual and physical connection that is not just about land, it's also about our Aboriginal constellations. The stars guide us on how we interact with our country. And it's a cultural science. I know that people call it traditional ecological knowledge. I believe we need to transgress that. I believe that cultural knowledge, not just within Australia, but globally, is a science. It has sustained us. And from an Australian point of view, it has sustained us on the driest inhabited continent on this planet since time immemorial. Can I just go back one slide, please? Sorry. I just want to highlight cultural science. It may not be a written science. It's a narrative. It's lessons that have been handed down from generation to generation and continues to today. We use our cultural science. It's interwoven into our song, our art, and our dance. And everything about our cultural way of life is interwoven into that. That's how we tell our stories. Rock art, etchings, stone carvings, middens. We know our country. We know it backwards. I want to highlight and acknowledge my cousin, Faye Mosley, who grew up in Cootamundra Girls' Home as a stolen woman. And this image is of three mighty arteries. You call them rivers. It's the same thing, we call them arteries. You call them creeks, we call them veins. It's the same thing. It's the same science, it's the same branding, just different language. So this magnificent river here is called the Darling, now co-branded to the Barker because of the Barkindji people. The middle one is the Murrumbidgee, and that is its traditional name, the Bidgee. And the bottom one is that of the mighty Murray. And I choose to call it the Dungala, which is my lessons from the Yorta Yorta people. And you'll see the tapestry of sites of significance that are interwoven into this artwork. Meeting places, food security, burial places, our native fish. So our cultural science doesn't need to be a written science. We should not have to conform to a Western ideology of science. This science, our cultural way of life, enshrined in that is our cultural responsibilities and obligation to not just care for country, but be involved in it, in the repairing of country. And I'm going to be a bit bold and say that it's taken 233 years since first contact to see the disconnection of our arteries and our veins. Just very quickly, we talk about country as a living, breathing entity. And for a living, breathing entity such as us as human beings, we need all our vital organs to be operating in unison, to be functionable. It's the same as our country. And water's centrality to that is paramount in our culture. Without gali, that's what we call water in my language, life becomes very hard. We've seen native fish populations decrease over the last 233 years to less than 10% since first contact. But the story in with that is that we are now being engaged with our traditional knowledge, our cultural science, in re-establishing those populations, particularly of those native fish that are on the precipice of extinction. So, next slide, please. So globally, we've seen this movement called Nothing About Us Without Us. Now, in my country, and when I get the opportunity to talk, we use our totems, our sites of significance across our country, particularly in my case, across my country, to be able to tell the story. I was with so I want to start with the artwork again. That's a better image of it. Talk about our totemic species and the values. You know, you talk about health indicators. Our totemic relationship and spiritual relationship with various animals and plants is alive and vibrant. And they are health indicators on how country is functioning or it's dysfunctional. So I want to point out mullein, the wedge-tailed eagle, strength, wisdom and protection. And I trust that mullein's watching over us and these wonderful women that I get to share the platform with today to give us strength to deliver a very powerful message together about collaboration. The middle symbol, and I stand before you as a very proud Aboriginal man to be a champion of women. We sit equally. In my nation, we sit as equals. We understand the role. We understand the need to bring all that knowledge, that traditional knowledge, that cultural science, that knowledge into play. And it's not just a male thing. And we also have that reinvestment into our next generations. Because we know that we need to have one thing about Aboriginal life is the changing of the guard. So we are now resetting and establishing a pathway for our youth to realise their potential as future leaders by taking them on the journey with us and with our champions. Our meeting places where everybody sits around with us. Our champions, our non-Aboriginal champions that are inside government agencies working to unlock or to provide the windows of opportunities for us to have a greater voice, to build our capacity to understand Westminster systems of government, policy, legislation, and where we can identify instruments or mechanisms inside the legislative instruments that we can use to our benefit. So nothing about us without us. We have always had governance. We have always had structures about decision making. But as we progress forward, and I'm going to show you a timeline shortly about how we've operated in a vacuum of opportunity through not understanding our cultural way of life, that cultural responsibility, and our laws and customs and practices. So nothing about us is not unique to Australia. It's a global movement with the Indigenous world that we live in. Next slide, please. So to create a greater understanding, we use modern day technology and imagery to educate our non-Aboriginal partners, decision makers, policy makers, legislation makers about how our connectivity. Now, I'm going to try and not step on some women here, but I want to tell you a story about my grandfather. Where I come from is the northern part of the Murray-Darling Basin. And my nation, you can fit 3 Great Britons in it. 11 rivers, the Great Artesian Basin, and an international Ramsar site. And my grandfather told me as a very young man, the northern part of the Murray-Darling Basin is the lungs of that food bowl. I want to show you something, outline something. What's that shape like? A lung. And I sat on the Dungala with Uncle Colin Walker, and I think Uncle Colin is about 88 now, 89, down here on the Murray River, and he said, yes, he said, we're the kidneys. We are the kidneys of the system. Remember what I said about all our vital organs, the connectivity, the blood flow, the river flow, the water flow through our arteries and our veins? That connects us. So we use these modern day tools to enhance every opportunity we can to educate our champions. We understand that they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, from, asking the wrong question, but we create safe environments where we can have the courageous conversations, the necessary courageous conversations, for you not just to talk with us, but to walk with us, to take you on a journey of understanding, and that two-way knowledge exchange is where you learn about our culture, but we also get to learn about mainstream ways of making decisions, unlocking the opportunities through legislative instruments, policy development, and turning our communities into empowered communities that are capable of making the necessary decisions about their cultural footprint. Next slide, please. So we have developed a water timeline in Australia. We start here. I want to tell you that, probably going to give away my age, but in my formative years, I was not recognised as a human being. I was part of the flora and fauna of my country. It was only when the 1967 referendum, when 92% of Australia, not Aboriginal because we didn't have the right to vote, but 92% of Australia said yes, they are citizens. So when we talk about collaboration and reconciliation, it's not this wonderful 22-year-old ideology for me. It's been going on since first contact, but we don't talk about it because everybody wants to learn about the acts of genocide and all the atrocities of yesteryear. This is living, breathing, visual collaboration. So in 1983, the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Rights Act of 1983 is recognised in the UN as the most progressive act of any state in the world for Indigenous people. 1983, land ownership, freehold title, and with that became a financial economy. In 1993, we had the federal government's Native Title Act. I want to highlight those two because one's the state and one's the federal. They are both designed to give the same outcome, land ownership, and that custodial ownership and responsibility to care for country. The other thing I want to point out is it started in the red. Sparsely populated, and if you'll see, we've gone from amber to blue. And if you look at the far end of this timeline, I've deliberately coloured it green because it's all systems go at the moment. Through the leadership, the strong leadership of our champions that are in the corridors of power, that have walked and continue to walk with us. Virginia and I, and Virginia will talk more about this, sit on the Committee of Aboriginal Water Interests, which is a federal committee, and it is equal. Men and women, equal numbers, sitting around, sharing respect, but also sharing the voices and sharing the load and sharing our knowledge, more importantly. Virginia could wax lyrically about the Human Rights Commission. There's a whole range of things that Virginia will entertain you with from an Indigenous woman and an Indigenous perspective, but particularly from an Indigenous woman's leadership perspective. So I want to come back to now the collaboration is only as good as what we make it. The Australian Water Partnerships has given us the opportunity to be here today. An instrument that is funded by the federal government, that is focused on inclusion, respect, and sharing the journey, and their willingness to come with a wondering mind to sit with us and learn and how we can be better together moving forward into the future. It's not easy. We have many trials and tribulations, and we test one another ourselves, but we test one another with respect. So I don't want to talk much more because I think that, well, I don't think, I want the female people that I'm sharing the stage with to have the stage today. So my job is just to set the scene. And we don't have a word for goodbye because goodbye is definitive. So we say Yanay. In my language, Yanay is we'll go. In other words, I'll go now, but I'm going to see you soon. So I say Yanay.
Thank you, Phil, and what a wonderful way to set the scene for us all here today. There's a couple of really strong messages out of that, and it is a journey that we're all travelling on, and it's a journey where we're all learning from each other along the way. And the key element for me is that respect and understanding and empathy for someone else's situation creates the opportunity for meaningful dialogue, and that's creating a momentum in Australia that we're really proud to share with you. We're not there yet. We've got a long way to go, but we are really moving in the right direction, and I'm very proud to be working with people like Phil and Virginia. Our next speaker is Dr. Virginia Marshall from the Wiradjuri Nyimba country. Virginia's academic achievements are extensive and include the inaugural Indigenous Postgraduate Fellow at the Australian National University with the Schools of Regulation and Global Governance and the Fenner School of Environment and Science. Virginia is a solicitor passionate about Indigenous rights and is involved in numerous high-level committees, panels and boards. Virginia Marshall is an influencer. She's an influential leader with a fascinating story to tell. Over to you, Virginia.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil, for setting the scene. It's always wonderful. You want to go this way? Thanks for setting the scene, because there's so much that we want to tell you about our experiences, and I also acknowledge the Indigenous peoples from Australia sitting here today. And we have an incredible history, and it's really amazing that we've all survived it. It's just a testimony to our resilience, and so may it ever be. So I guess I'm also really happy to be here because one of the issues when I started in academia, I had 4 years of high school, and I had 4 children and went off to university to do 6 degrees in 5.5 years, and then my PhD. So I wasn't working hard enough, obviously. But it's just been an incredible journey, and I've just come out of 5 years as a postdoc with ANU, the Australian National University. And it's really an amazing insight that I've had, because I chose to actually work with Fenner School of Science and the Australian National University, and also the regulation of global governance at the Australian National University. So it was really interesting for me, because as a practicing lawyer, I've got my own firm that I started in 2013 because I was really keen to see human rights, and also the elevation of what we've been talking about today is rights in general, legal rights. I've come out of a native title case this week, this year, 6 weeks at the federal court with respondents. So, it's really incredible. I started as a criminal defence lawyer and thrown in the deep end, and I guess some of you here have been thrown in the deep end of that experience, and really, it's really helped my work that I've been pursuing. I've just been appointed as one of the 3 women to the climate change advisory to the minister in Australia. So that's been fantastic, because a lot of the work that I've done last year with the local communities, Indigenous peoples here at Glasgow was amazing for COP. And, those commonalities that we have with you, with the Indigenous peoples from across the world, it was just so astounding that we had those commonalities. But as I said, Indigenous peoples from Australia are also very different. So we have different cultural needs, and a lot of that plays out with how I've been really approaching my work in the last 5 years at the Australian National University. Because as Phil said, some people don't believe that Indigenous knowledge and practices and mimicry and bioindicators, for example, are science in Indigenous knowledge sense. I think I've proved that wrong over a number of years, being invited to give climate change lectures to climate change professors and their students, talk about agriculture and non-carbon markets to students that rarely get the opportunity to really listen to Indigenous people speak about these things. And many other opportunities, working with Jamie Pittock, for example, Mark Howden at the Institute for Climate Change and Energy and Disaster Solutions. So all of that has really prepared me for the next adventure. And the next adventure I'm going to talk about now, which is the Australian Research Council grant that I got with just over $1 million for 3 to 4 years to ensure that we can have Indigenous-led medicines. So this is communities getting that toolkit, getting that understanding of how we actually progress through the system that we have in Australia at the moment. I'm sure you're familiar with the FDA in America, but in Australia we have a very immature system with medicines, and we have medicines that are men's medicines and women's medicines, and we have that knowledge that transpires. But in the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is that similar body that the work that FDA does, is that they have more of a reliance and understanding and valuing of two systems. One is the Chinese system that is written about medicines, so they acknowledge that that is a very strong case, and also Ayurvedic medicines from India. So they can see, because that's in writing, that it's stronger than oral evidence. But I'd actually say that's ridiculous, because when I've been in these native title hearing this year, we have a part of the Evidence Act which says that when a claimant gives their evidence, that evidence is admissible. It's not hearsay at all. And when they do give that evidence, of course, it's tested in cross-examination. So we have that rigorous system. But when we say that it's oral evidence, it's accepted. That's my point. But in the current system, we're looking at ways that we really will convince the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, that because it's oral, it doesn't mean that it's not safe. And we can transgress over those toxicology issues and many other issues that are demanded for a plant to be patented, for example. For the last 12 years, I've been a volunteer lawyer with a community. 2 of those community members are really the driving force in my team, and they're paid, which is really a revelation, because not many Indigenous peoples are paid or recognised properly in research. So I think that that's really fantastic. So I'll just go to that slide before with Mum Annie, one before that. So this is us in the Kimberley. This is Annie Milgan, and she's a traditional owner, a cultural boss of women's business. And what she has in her hand and my hand, we've got the seeds that the community have actually gone out and really collected. And it's their seeds from their country. And that's really important, because that seed collection is not an easy job, right? Some of the seeds, for example, in kangaroo grass, are so fine I couldn't fit them between my fingers. They're like little slivers. And when you think that we use those to create bread in those early days, those little seeds gave life. You know, they were really, really important. And we used to call them Johnny cakes, right? So, you know, those sort of things, that collecting seeds are important, and planting them on country, because the one thing that I've always found as being a lawyer on this this particular community is that when you look at the importance of the supply system, you need to have harvested plantation, right? We can't keep on depending on taking from the natural environment, because if we're going to do commercialisation, we need considered supply that's also going to ensure that the rest of that particular plant or the tree is not going to be just cut down and left with nothing at the end of the day. So, you know, that's really important. These cultural plants, the genetic resources are really important for responsibility, for teaching, for the transmission of knowledge, you know, and we do that with our foods. You know, a lot of the foods that we eat are culturally important. They use herbs and spices. And this is really a representative of why, you know, we do what we do, because it really strengthens women's resolve and it strengthens their knowledge to give to the young ones. Next slide. So Bruno Dan, this is a really fabulous story. A Nyul traditional owner. Gubbinge is a very incredible antioxidant, but it also has more vitamin C than oranges, for example. And it was really interesting because Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, was really interested in actually progressing a soft drink with Gubbinge. And I'm sure it would have been very popular. But I, again, with my colleague a number of years ago for the rural industries and for the Australian government, we developed a really good template, a contract for Gubbinge that's grown on country and Nyul, but also in other states. So there were 3 other states. And the really interesting progress for that was it had to be written from a specific point of view from Aboriginal people and what they would want. So the benefit sharing, the acknowledgement of Indigenous knowledge, that was really essential. So I think the other thing is, if we can just skip to the next slide, this is an example of some incredible salt bushes. They also create a lot of good health, and you're able to actually use these and take them and suck on them when you're in the desert. The next one, please. We know that the UN Convention on the Biological Diversity is so important. We know that the Indigenous peoples across the world manage the majority of biodiversity. But in Australia, only 233 years old, but the rate of destruction, the rate of endangered species coming up year by year is just shocking. So, you know, we need to do better in that. It's great to have a convention, but, you know, we have to implement it. We have to have compliance. We have to have outcomes that protect it, because, you know, just relying on small communities themselves to make compliance happen doesn't happen. Nagoya Protocol, just a quick notion on this one, is that we haven't ratified the Nagoya Protocol. We need to. So that's a really important point, because like the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, we haven't legislated that. So unlike Canada, BC, they have legislated it. It does have a narrow sense and application in Canada. What I'd like to see is that we do have more stronger powers if that was legislated in the future. Next slide. So John Watson, who I work with on this project, the Australian Research Council grant, an incredible senior person, again, saying, you know, burning country is so important. We've actually delivered incredible responses and learning, people learning again on how to actually cool fire practices and how to burn country without burning the top of the trees, and making sure that we don't burn the bottom. Now, here is just an example. The Kimberley Land Council has done some amazing work in Western Australia. Again, Indigenous land and sea ranges, there's about 188 of the land and sea organisations, and they are living on country. They're amazing work. We're hoping that we get more women too. We don't have parity. Eugene Bargo, another gentleman that has walked his boundaries of country. He's delivered incredible learning to youth at risk to go to jail. So he's done a lot of work. He lives in a cabin. He was living with his King Brown snake at the bottom of his bed until they came to a disagreement. So, you know, he's a cultural man. He's an incredible leader, and he's also the real deal. So, you know, he's got amazing capacity. And again, the Northern Territory, we've got a lot to do there. We've got a lot to do in many states. For example, we've got a pretty woeful Heritage Act in Western Australia. There's more things that we can do. Indigenous knowledge, again, it has to be acknowledged as a science. When we do toxicology, safety, testing, Aboriginal people have been doing that for tens of thousands of years. So, you know, this time next year, I hope I can tell you that we've advanced with some of these reforms. I hope at the end of 4 years that I can say these findings are going to be relevant to all Indigenous people and cut to the chase and say it is science and yes, it is our knowledge. Thank you. Marangubu.
Thank you, Virginia. And you can see the blending of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous science with Western science leads to really good outcomes. And the bushfire and the examples that have been put before us by Dr. Virginia Marshall are real evidence of how that can work. So thank you, Virginia. Our next speaker is Ursula Rakova. Ursula Rakova is a community leader. She's an environmentalist and a climate change activist from Papua New Guinea. In 2008, she was awarded the Pride of PNG Award for her environmental contributions to the development of her country. Over to you, Ursula.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for being late. I got lost somewhere, but I just want to give you a case study of what we have done. I come from a small atoll island in Bougainville, northeast of Bougainville, Papua New Guinea. The islands are 1.2 meter above sea level. And before we had water wells where we could drink from. Nowadays, we don't have those water wells anymore. Yeah, so that's where I come from. The small blue secular is where I am from, and that's Bougainville, northeast of Papua New Guinea. I'll share with you what we have gone through, what our issues are, what our challenges are, what have been our steps in trying to deal with water, because we have lost that on the island, and just my conclusions. Like I've said, water is really precious to us, and we've got our own ways of preserving water. In Bougainville, we are known as the rainmakers. Our elders can do chants and then the rain will fall. Nowadays, it's very difficult. Rain comes in every time. We can't foresee when the rains are going to fall anymore because they're just coming every time. The storms are also coming in frequently. We cannot, basically, we cannot drink from our wells anymore. They are inundated with salt water. We can't wash from them. We just need to use the sea. Previously, the sea that we loved is no longer being helpful to us. It's no longer being friendly to us because it's washing over our islands and making those islands really too salty for us, even to grow our food. We've actually relocated 30 families from the atoll to mainland Bougainville. We have relocated those families onto Catholic-owned plantations that were previously owned by the Catholic Church. They have gifted those plantations to us. But what has really created those? Climate change is the biggest factor of what is causing destruction on our islands. It's even uprooting mangroves that were grown during our ancestral days. Those mangroves, some of them are rotting away because they cannot withstand the strong currents, and those mangroves are dying away. But what have we done? We've actually planted in our new relocation site, we have planted 152,000 trees. we aim to plant 500,000, which in return will basically provide itself. We also trying to do tree nurseries. We are nurturing trees so that when they are 6 or 9 months old, we plant them. We replant them where we want to plant them. We are seriously looking at wash projects, not just water tanks, but wash projects. Water tanks where they'll come in with sanitation and health. Far too often, international groups come in and they say they are doing wash projects. But they only provide us with water tanks. So what happens? Where is the sanitation? Where is the health and hygiene part of the support that they want to give? In Bougainville alone, we have more than 40 rivers, running rivers, fast flowing rivers, but we can't drink from those rivers. We drink from little mountain water that's dropping from inside the rocks, and we put in bamboos. We get bamboos, we put them onto those stones, and then we can fetch water from them. Because we know that those are clean, but not our running rivers. You are seeing these pictures. These are pictures by young people, our young people. Because they know that if we plant trees, we plant mangroves, we contain our shoreline rivers, our shoreline water springs that are coming out of the sand. And inside land, we have water also springing from underground. We can protect those. But we need to plant more trees. We need to plant more mangroves so that we contain those water sources and that they are clean for us to drink from. Water contamination is a big issue for us. Although we have more than 40 rivers, we cannot drink from them, as I have said. Sea level rise continues to destroy the shorelines and shrinks the islands that we live on because of the sea level rise. On my island, it's I think the height is 1.2 meter above sea level. So you can basically, if we say we are going to dig, we are actually going to dig into the salt water. Loss of food security. We cannot say that we will continue to live on those islands because we can live on those islands, but what are we going to plant? And if we do plant them, when can we harvest them? In 3 years' time? By then, what happens to us? Loss of livelihood. I know that we are moving to mainland Bougainville. I know that we are going to leave our ancestral homes. But we need to move because we need to sustain our lives. An old uncle once told me, we can't leave the island. God gave us this island, so he can't take these islands away from us. And I told him, we can live on the island, but what are we going to eat? We cannot continue to survive on fish alone. We need to get something else so that we can survive. We have no protection for our special groups, widows, children, women, people living with disability. Far too often when we don't have food on the island and it goes for months, these are the people we want to save. So this is why we have to relocate them and move them to mainland Bougainville where they can sustain themselves. But we can't continue to do this on our own because we have done that. For the last 15 years, we've been doing this as a community group. We need support. We need support from countries or industrialized countries who have created climate change. Because we are in this together and we all need to come up with solutions together. We all need support from each other. This is a picture of our mini food forest. We planted these trees in 2011. These trees are now 30 to 40 meters high. These trees are hardwood, softwood, fruit trees, nut trees, and palms. 152,000. We aim to plant 500,000. Eventually, we will end up with 1 million trees. And we are doing that. We are committed to doing it. We want to contain our dances so that we can take part in our cultural events. Our dances are our identity. It is our culture, and we want to maintain those dances. We want to continue to protect our forest so that our forest will protect us. We want to continue to protect our mangroves because we know our mangroves will protect us. Our next step was, I told you, we just don't want water tanks. We want a shower room inside our homes, and we want a toilet inside our home. So far, we are doing nurseries in 5 communities. And in those communities, we are nurturing 5,000 mangrove seedlings. In total, we will nursery 25,000 mangrove seedlings. On Carteret alone, we are nurturing 15,000 mangrove seedlings. And we know those 25,000 mangrove seedlings will end up being a lot of mangroves. In Bougainville alone, we have 12 species of mangroves. I know that in the world, there are 43 or so mangroves. We only have 12, but we want to protect our mangroves. We are also establishing 5 nurseries of trees: softwood, hardwood, fruit trees, nut trees, and palms. We also want to maintain our cocoa trees. I know that a lot of you eat chocolates. Yes or no? Yes. So when we export our cocoa, our dried cocoa beans, please provide us your markets. We'll flood your markets with our cocoa. We also want to construct 350 climate smart buildings made of bricks so that it's easier for our people living with disabilities, our elderly, and people who basically aren't able to access steps or staircases. We are also looking at developing 5 school curriculums for our high school and secondary schools. One on climate change, one on mangroves and its importance, and one on disaster risk management, so that the schools in Bougainville will learn how to maintain and contain the resources that they have, but at the same time appreciate what we can do for them. Climate action now. I know that in 2015 in Paris, we talked about climate financing. Where is it? My community has not seen that. And the theme for this COP is Together for Implementation. Finance our mangroves. Finance our forests, our tree nurseries. Finance our climate smart homes, 350, only 350 climate smart homes. Finance them. Thank you.
Well done, Ursula. Wow, what a powerful story that is. And it's a demonstration of true community leadership, Ursula. We take our hat off to you. We dips our lid, as we say in Australia, and say, well done. You're an amazing, not only woman, but a leader within your community. So we hope your message is being heard loud and clear. And we hope that you get the support that you need, because you've got the means, you've got the know-how, you've got the community connections to make it happen. Thank you. Now, I'd like to introduce Elisangela de Oliveira Menezes from the Brazilian Special Secretariat of Indigenous Health, and Camila Amui, who will share with us the national program for access to drinkable water on Indigenous lands in Brazil. Over to you.
Boa tarde a todos. Hoje é um dia importante para a saúde indígena no Brasil, pois temos a honra de estar participando da COP27, compartilhando as ações da Saúde Especial, da Secretaria Especial de Saúde Indígena do Brasil, e especialmente o Programa Nacional de Acesso à Água Potável, num evento de tamanha magnitude. A Secretaria Especial de Saúde... Oh, one moment.
Hi everyone, I'll be translating to Elisangela. So she said good afternoon, and she said that she's very happy to be here because it's a very special day for Indigenous health of Brazil, because we are being able to share with you our new program, which is the National Water Access Program to Indigenous Communities. And she's glad that it's in such a big event like COP27.
A Secretaria Especial de Saúde Indígena, ela atua com ações de atenção à saúde primária, ações de água e saneamento, em 34 distritos distribuídos ao longo do Brasil. Hoje contamos com aproximadamente 760 mil indígenas em mais de 6 mil aldeias.
So the Special Secretariat of Indigenous Health in Brazil is part of the Ministry of Health, and it's divided in 34 districts, sanitary districts of Indigenous Health. The districts attend over 700,000 Indigenous people in Brazil, which are divided in over 6,000 communities.
Nós trouxemos um vídeo que mostra um pouco das ações de saneamento e água, e, posteriormente, a minha colega Camila vai seguir com a apresentação.
She said that we brought a video to show a bit of the program, and then we'll carry on with the presentation. I think they're just having technical problems to start the video. Do you want us to present? If you want, we can just talk. Yeah? Okay. So can you put the PowerPoint presentation and then we can talk with that? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that happens. So the program that we're talking about is the national program to provide water access to indigenous communities of Brazil. And it's being made by the federal government with the indigenous communities. So the CESAI, which is the Special Secretariat of Indigenous Health in Brazil, is made in such ways that the indigenous communities are part of the organization. So we are divided in 34 districts, and the indigenous leaders divide themselves in councils in the communities, which are goes to like local councils, then go wider and wider until they made part of the national ones. And in Brazil, we have 27 states, but we have 34 districts because they are divided in ways to group the communities as they identify themselves. So the districts attend those communities, and we are launching a program to provide water access to those communities. So how do we do that? How can we make it in a way that we absorb and they are part of the decision making? It was a hard challenge for us because today now in Brazil, we have over 50% of the population without water access. So in Brazil, indigenous children have over 14 times more it's more likely to die. Sorry? Okay. So indigenous children in Brazil are more likely to die from waterborne diseases, and we have to do something about it. So we launched this program, creating the program with them. I think the video is ready, so we can show the presentation.
Não condizem com a pureza da tradição cultural, com a saúde e com a existência da vida no meio das florestas, as planícies e em outros biomas brasileiros. Por isso, a Secretaria Especial de Saúde Indígena do Ministério da Saúde criou o Programa Nacional de Acesso à Água Potável em Terras Indígenas, o PNAT. Observando indicadores de saúde e índices populacionais, os técnicos da CESAI vão identificar, avaliar e realizar obras de infraestrutura fundamentais para o acesso à água potável e de qualidade nos 34 distritos sanitários especiais indígenas. Os sistemas de abastecimento e tratamento de água vão chegar às aldeias e comunidades nos lugares mais distantes, por meio de poços artesianos ou equipamentos de captação nas superfícies dos rios.
Por meio dos sistemas de abastecimento de água, que levará a água até próximo às suas residências, os indígenas não precisarão mais se deslocar até os rios, a água levará mais vida, mais saúde e mais alegria às nossas comunidades.
A meta é levar água potável a 78% da população atendida pelo Subsistema de Atenção à Saúde Indígena, já nos primeiros 4 anos do programa. Ações educativas vão capacitar os próprios indígenas para realizar a manutenção das infraestruturas de abastecimento e manter a qualidade da água.
Porque a água, para nós, ela é vida.
Hoje, então, ministro Erivelto, senhores indígenas, todos que nos assistem, CEAMB, CESAI como um todo. É um dia de celebração e de vitória, é um avanço da CESAI, é um legado que a CESAI deixa no dia de hoje para os indígenas e para o nosso SUS. Muito obrigado.
Dizer que, para mim, é uma honra muito grande participar dessa cerimônia que institui o Programa Nacional de Acesso à Água Potável em Terras Indígenas. É uma conquista que é fundamental. Como foi dito aqui, a água é saúde, a água é vida.
Esse programa que vai levar 20 anos de programa, eu não acho, como eu tenho certeza, que ele implantado verdadeiramente e for instalado na ponta, como deve ser, ele vai ajudar muito, muito, muito mesmo a todas as aldeias, todas as comunidades indígenas, todas as terras indígenas, não só daqui da região do Distrito Médio do Rio Purus, mas de toda, dos 34 distritos do Brasil.
Subindo o rio, da aldeia Cocai Moro para a aldeia Ricarô, vamos inaugurar um sistema de abastecimento de água, fazendo o que a gente precisa fazer nas aldeias do Brasil. Essa inauguração simboliza a ação, o nosso programa que a CESAI está fazendo, que é o Programa Nacional de Acesso à Água Potável nas Aldeias Indígenas do Brasil. E esse é o padrão CESAI de construção de abastecimento de água. Nós temos aqui um poço de 130 metros de profundidade, nós temos o sistema de energia solar e a captação de água na caixa d'água e abastecimento de todas as casas da aldeia. Então, isso é CESAI, isso é Ministério da Saúde, isso é Governo Federal. Muito obrigado.
Yeah, so we actually launched it last week, PENAT, which is the national program to access to indigenous health, and you saw the video of it. And the program goal is to attend in 20 years over 95% of indigenous population, which is over 700,000 people. And how can we do that? We identified with the communities what are the main goals, and they suggested also strategies that we could implement. So with them, we identified that we needed to implement and renovate and expand water systems, because sometimes we have systems in the communities, but they don't work properly. They don't have the right maintenance, or maybe the community needs to understand about the chlorine, that sometimes it's hard for them to drink because of the taste. It has to come in the right dose. So we need to also go to those systems implemented. We need to control the water quality. So not only implementing the system, but making sure that they work and we want to do that by implementing water labs in places in the middle of the Amazon and also in the other districts of Brazil. We also want to do educational actions in sanitation and health, as you said, like WASH programs, because we believe that we need not only to give the water, but also to make sure that it's been used correctly. And we also want to maintain this water supplies that are already there. For us, one of the main goals of this project is the social participation. So to build the main structure of it, we had workshops being done with the main leaders of those 34 districts. Not only that, in those workshops, the Indigenous leader listed the main problems that they are facing and also proposed solutions to them. And those are the solutions that we implemented in the program. But not only that, because it's a program that will last 20 years, what we want to do is to make sure that we keep learning from it and keep changing it. So it has to be flexible enough so we can see in the middle of the way where we need to do better and change it to do so. The program will be financed by the Ministry of Health of Brazil, but we also want to look for partnerships with national and international organizations, governmental and non-governmental organizations. So that was a bit of a rush, but we want to make sure that Indigenous communities of Brazil have access to clean water. It is unacceptable that the communities that take care of the Amazon don't have the water quality that they need to survive to do so. So it is also an act of protecting the climate to protect those communities. And we want to make sure that we do that, providing water to the program. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Camilla. And I do apologise for the problem with the technology, but I would like to actually ask you all now to join with me in thanking our amazing panellists and the stories that we've heard today from Australia, from Fiji and Brazil regarding Indigenous action in implementing climate resilient communities. So congratulations to you all and thank you all for sharing your stories with us.